felt like the perfect day to address a theory that many people out there have been speculating on, that Meghan Markle has lied about her age. Is she actually older?
She suffers from such a rare disorder of being unable to just be a human.
I believe she had a clear motive for writing family off because it would seemingly justify and perhaps delay the revelation of all of the lies that she had told the royal family.
I can't stand the inauthenticity. It has to stop. I tried with you, Meghan. Really, you got to pick a lane. You got to stay in it. Okay? That's all I'm saying.
What if the woman who spent years presenting herself to the world as a beacon of radical honesty, a truth teller, a trailblazer, a woman who claimed she had the courage to say the quiet parts out loud, had been quietly sitting on a secret about her own identity so fundamental, so central to everything she has ever claimed to be, that the moment it unraveled, it could pull the entire carefully constructed narrative down with it? That is the question Candace Owens is now putting before the world, and once you hear it, you cannot unhear it. Not a question about political opinion, not a debate about privilege or palace etiquette, a question about something far more basic, far more personal than any of that. A question about who Meghan Markle actually is, how old she actually is, and why, when you start pulling at that single thread, the rest of the story begins to look very, very different.
There are so many telltale signs that something is clearly wrong with Meghan. And I don't mean it in a bad way, but I mean, how can you get your age so wrong? Did you know that in 1997, when she met Yasmin Bleeth, when she claims that she was working for Humphrey Yogurt, age 13, she also, or somebody with the name Meghan Markle, filled out a questionnaire for Sears, the company, claiming that she was 21 years of age.
Not just to believe that she went from being a D-list actress to becoming Martha Stewart in 3 years. Like, this is totally...
To understand why this story is hitting the way it is, you have to understand the climate in which Candace Owens is raising it, because this is not happening in a vacuum. This is not some idle tabloid whisper being passed around anonymous accounts at 2 a.m. This is a prominent commentator, one of the most watched, most downloaded, most discussed voices in American media right now, putting her name and her platform behind a set of questions that strike at the very heart of who Meghan Markle has told the world she is. We are at a moment in the Sussex story where the public mood has fundamentally shifted. The global goodwill that surrounded Harry and Meghan when they stepped back from royal duties has not merely cooled, it has, for a significant portion of the audience, curdled into something closer to deep suspicion. Netflix documentaries, the Oprah interview, the memoir, the podcast, the endless round of television appearances, all of it has been received not as the authentic self-revelation it was positioned to be, but as a relentlessly managed, carefully curated campaign. People have started to ask a very uncomfortable question. If so much of what has been presented was shaped, polished, and packaged for public consumption, what, if anything, can actually be taken at face value? And it is into that climate that Candace Owens arrives with her investigation, not with a book, not with a carefully worded statement, with the kind of sharp, unapologetic, go-for-the-jugular commentary that has made her one of the most divisive and most watched voices of her generation. She does not do gentle, she does not do nuance for its own sake. She asks the hard question, she names the uncomfortable detail, and she dares anyone to come back at her with something more than outrage. That willingness to go where others hesitate is precisely why this story is gaining the kind of traction it is, because the claims she is making are not minor, they are not peripheral. They go to the very core of who Meghan Markle has claimed to be, and if they hold up under scrutiny, they reframe everything, absolutely everything.
A trained actress, what she does is that she studies people. She's not a good actress, but she is a trained one, right? She's been doing it her entire life.
What the hell is going on with this woman? Is she adopted or is she just a natural? I mean, is she such a liar she can't even understand that we can all see her?
But what is she not contextually aware of? She's trying to hide something. This is really sloppy.
Before we go any further into the substance of what is being claimed, it is worth pausing on who is doing the claiming. Because the messenger matters enormously here, and Candace Owens is not someone whose name can be attached to a story without immediately changing the weight of it. Owens built her platform on one thing above all else, saying the things that other people in her position were not willing to say. She came up in a media environment where certain conversations were considered off-limits, and she walked directly into every single one of them. You may agree with her, you may find her exhausting, you may think she goes too far, or not far enough, or in entirely the wrong direction. But what you cannot credibly argue is that she is reckless with her claims in the way that anonymous gossip accounts are reckless. When Candace Owens puts her name on a story, she knows what she is doing. She knows the legal exposure. She knows the reputational stakes. She has been through enough public battles to understand exactly what it means to make a claim about a public figure that does not stand up. That is what makes this so striking. This is not someone posting a theory from behind an anonymous handle. This is someone with a multi-million strong audience, a deeply established public profile, and a clear understanding of the consequences of getting something like this wrong, and she is standing behind it. Owens has spoken about Meghan Markle before at length, and with considerable heat. She has consistently described what she sees as a pattern of strategic self-invention, a carefully managed persona designed to position Meghan as a victim of forces, racism, institutional cruelty, family rejection that Owens has argued were largely constructed for public consumption. She has never been shy about those views. But this latest line of inquiry is different in kind, not just in degree. Because this time, she is not questioning Meghan's narrative about the palace. She is questioning Meghan's narrative about herself, her most basic biographical facts, the building blocks of her public identity. And that, frankly, is where things become genuinely extraordinary.
I think the palace and the machinery of the monarchy needs to take Harry and Meghan more seriously and make sure that Harry and Meghan's antics don't impact the future.
Stuck because she was an actress who became a real princess, who wants to be an actress again, but has to continue to pretend to be a real princess.
And it's living a life that she's winning and she's doing all these great things, but the reality is not that. The reality is she's a joke.
It began, as so many of these things do, with a small detail that refused to stay small. Candace Owens, in the course of her deep dive commentary on the Sussex story, turned her attention to something that many people had simply accepted without question. Meghan Markle's official birth year of 1981, making her 43 years old today, a straightforward fact, listed in official biographies, repeated in thousands of articles, built into the foundation of how her story has been told. But Owens started asking a question that almost nobody in mainstream media had thought to ask. What happens when you check that number against the other numbers in the story? What happens when you line up the documented details of Meghan Markle's life, her education, her early career, her known social circles against the birth year that has always been presented as settled fact? Do the pieces fit the way they are supposed to fit? Or is there something in the alignment that simply does not add up? The answer, according to Owens, is that the pieces do not fit, not even close. And the more carefully she looked, the more the inconsistencies multiplied, each one individually, explainable, perhaps, but collectively forming a picture that she argues deserves a great deal more scrutiny than it has ever received. Now, it is important to be clear about something before we go further. Meghan Markle's team has consistently and emphatically denied these claims. Her legal representatives have described challenges to her documented birth year as baseless and defamatory. Supporters argue that the inconsistencies being pointed to have entirely innocent explanations: errors in magazine listings, outdated database entries, the natural imprecision of records from decades ago. Those perspectives deserve to be part of this conversation, and they will be, but they do not make the questions go away. And in the current climate, with so much of the Sussex story already under scrutiny, the questions are landing harder than they might have at any earlier point.
I've never seen this sort of, I've never seen someone that struggles to just give us like one strip of authenticity.
Is Megsy really lying about her age? Now, when you Google her, it says that she was born on the 4th of August 1981. And with today being her birthday, as of me recording this video, it's saying that she's 44 years old.
So what exactly is Candace Owens pointing to? What are the specific pieces of evidence she is presenting as the foundation of her case? Because this is where the story shifts from atmosphere to substance, and it is worth going through each element carefully, because each one, on its own, might be dismissed. Together, they are considerably harder to wave away. The first piece is a 1,997 issue of 17 magazine, a mainstream, widely distributed American publication, with a long history of features on young women in entertainment and public life. In that issue, page 90, there is a feature that lists Meghan Markle's age as 21, not 14, not 15, not 16, 21. Now, if the widely reported birth year of 1981 is accurate, Meghan would have been approximately 15 or 16 years old at the time of that publication. That is not a small discrepancy. That is a gap of 5 to 6 years sitting in print in a national magazine. And Owens is asking the obvious question, how does that happen? There are, of course, possible explanations. Magazine features can contain errors. Age listings can be submitted incorrectly, mistyped, or simply not verified. In the pre-internet era, fact-checking at a publication like 17 was not what it might be today. All of that is true. But here is the problem, and this is the problem that Owens keeps returning to. If it was simply a magazine error, it was a very specific kind of error. It did not list her as a year older or a year younger. It listed her as substantially older in a way that would have been immediately visible and immediately correctable had the information on file been clearly different. Which leads to an uncomfortable question. What information was on file? The second piece involves professional industry records. Owens has pointed to earlier versions of Meghan's profile in acting databases, the kind of industry standard reference tools that casting directors and producers use when they are considering an actor for a role. Those earlier versions, she claims, listed a birth year of 1977 4 years earlier than the 1981 that has become the established public record. Now, in Hollywood, age is not merely a number. It is a professional instrument. The roles available to an actress, the categories she fits, the way she is perceived in the room, all of it is shaped by her documented age. The pressure to manage that number, in a highly competitive industry, is well documented and widely understood. Owens is not alone in noting this. Industry observers have long acknowledged that the Hollywood ecosystem creates enormous incentives for age adjustment, particularly for women, and particularly in the earlier stages of a career. She is arguing that the discrepancy between an earlier industry listing and the current publicly documented birth year is consistent with exactly that kind of adjustment. Supporters push back, pointing out that databases like these can be edited, can contain errors, and have historically been unreliable in their biographical details. That is a fair point. But it does not fully explain why two different systems, an industry database and a national magazine, would independently arrive at ages that are substantially older than the one currently on record. And then there is the third element, which Owens describes as the detail that truly stopped her in her tracks. In 2019, a photograph was publicly shared, a deeply personal image connected to the arrival of Archie Harrison, Meghan and Harry's first child. The metadata embedded in that photograph, the invisible digital timestamp that records exactly when an image file was created, showed a date that did not align with the publicly stated timeline by 2 days. 2 days sounds small, and in isolation it is. Metadata can be affected by time zones, device settings, file transfers. There are any number of technical reasons why a timestamp might be off by 48 hours. But Owens notes that in a situation where every other detail is already being examined, even a small inconsistency becomes part of the pattern. And the pattern, she argues, is what matters here.
What is going on here? Why the secrecy around this woman's birth certificate? Why the secrecy? Why the mistakes in age that are so blatant for others? And you know what? This is like her education in university, that she claims that she double major in international relations and theater, when Northwestern has never given a major in international relations.
Not a surprise here because, yeah, she lies a lot about her stuff. We've caught her in so many lies. Her own sister has come forward, her family, everybody is exposing the lies that she's been telling.
It is worth being precise about what Candace Owens is and is not claiming here, because the story has a tendency, as stories like this always do, to run ahead of the actual facts. Owens has been characteristically direct in laying out her position, and it is important to represent it accurately rather than allow it to become a game of telephone. She is not claiming to have a birth certificate that contradicts Meghan's documented birth year. She is not presenting a single smoking gun document that settles the question definitively. What she is presenting is a collection of inconsistencies across different records, different time periods, different sources that she argues form a coherent pattern. Her core claim is that the official narrative around Meghan Markle's age and personal timeline contains contradictions that have never been adequately explained, and that the reluctance to engage with those contradictions directly is itself a form of information. Owens has also been clear about why she believes this matters beyond the biographical curiosity of it. Her argument is that Meghan Markle's entire public identity is built on a foundation of claimed authenticity. The narrative has always been, this is a woman who tells the truth about herself and about the world, even when the truth is uncomfortable, even when it costs her something, even when the people around her would prefer she stayed silent. That positioning, the authentic truth teller standing against the forces of institutional dishonesty, is the engine that has driven the Sussex public relations machine from the moment Harry and Meghan stepped back from their royal duties. And Owens is asking, what if that foundation is not as solid as it appears? What if the woman who built a global brand around radical transparency has been less than transparent about something as fundamental as her own identity? Because if that is the case, if the most basic biographical facts are in question, then every claim that rests on that foundation of authenticity becomes open to re-examination. Every grievance, every accusation, every tearful interview moment has to be assessed through a different lens. That is why this story is not simply about a number. It has never been about a number. It is about the integrity of a public persona. And in the current climate, where that persona has already taken considerable hits, the question of what is actually real, what, if anything, can simply be taken at face value has become more urgent than ever. Owens has been particularly pointed on one aspect of this story, the question of motive. Why, she asks, would there be any reason to obscure or adjust a birth year? For most people, the question would never arise. But for someone building a career in a highly competitive entertainment industry, and then transitioning to a global stage where personal narrative is the primary currency, the answer becomes more complicated. Image, she argues, is everything. And when image is everything, the temptation to shape every element of it, including the most basic ones, becomes a very human kind of calculation.
You're wondering, why does her age matter at all? Because her age would also have an impact on her ability to have children. Because if Meghan Markle is 4 years older than what we have been led to believe, it makes it even more difficult to believe that she was able to get pregnant so quickly. Never mind the hysterectomy stories that her family have told. But that would make it more difficult because that would make Meghan Markle near 50.
I'm going to quote Tom Bauer by saying, he said, look, we all laughed at Samantha and she was right. And everything she said has come true.
What gives Candace Owens' line of inquiry its particular force is not any single claim in isolation. It is the way it fits into a broader pattern, a pattern that, once you see it, is very difficult to unsee. Because this is far from the first time that questions about the consistency of Meghan Markle's self-presentation have been raised, and the fact that this latest set of questions lands in a context already thick with similar concerns is something that critics have not missed. Let us go back to the Oprah interview. That conversation, watched by an estimated 50 million people globally, was built on a series of very specific, very verifiable claims. Claims that were subsequently challenged. The assertion about the date of the private wedding ceremony before the official one. The claim about what was said regarding Archie's skin tone. The representation of how the request for mental health support was handled by the institution. Each of these assertions, in the months that followed, was either walked back, significantly qualified, or directly contradicted by the palace's own account. Not all of them, but enough to establish a concerning relationship between what Meghan Markle says happened and what the available record suggests actually happened. Then there is the broader question of Meghan's pre-royal narrative, the story of her background and upbringing that formed the emotional core of so many of her public appearances. The story of the little girl who grew up not quite fitting in anywhere, who worked hard, who earned her place in the world through determination and authenticity. A powerful story, a compelling story, but a story that, upon closer examination, has been found to contain details that do not entirely hold up contradictions between what was claimed in one context and what was documented in another. Discrepancies between the public account and the records of those who were actually present. Candace Owens is not the first to point this out, but she is making the argument in a way that connects the dots more explicitly than most. She is suggesting that the questions about Meghan's age are not an isolated anomaly. They are consistent with a broader approach to personal narrative, one that treats biographical detail as something to be managed and shaped rather than simply reported. And that argument, however uncomfortable it may be, has found a significant audience. The pattern, as Owens describes it, is one of selective transparency, the willingness to deploy personal details when they serve the narrative, the childhood, the biracial identity, the difficult family relationships, alongside a striking reluctance to allow those same details to be independently verified. The personal story is offered as evidence of authenticity, but the mechanisms that would allow that authenticity to be confirmed are not forthcoming. And in a world where trust is built on consistency, that gap becomes its own kind of statement.
Birth certificates. Putting her full official name of Rachel Meghan Markle, you can see that the official records show she was born in 1981. There it is, August 4th, 1981.
Meghan is a consummate survival actress. And you raise this extraordinary beginning of the year when she carved 2025 in the sand. And, it's a very, very interesting image that it came out on New Year's Day this year, because the previous weeks had been absolutely turgid and torrid for her. She had been dubbed Duchess Difficult again. There have been allegations of bullying.
Tyrant in high heels.
It would be a mistake to examine this story purely through the lens of Meghan's individual biography, without acknowledging the man who sits beside her in every chapter of it, and whose own choices have played no small role in creating the environment in which these questions are now being asked. Prince Harry, Duke of Sussex, is now 40 years old. He has spent the better part of 6 years making the argument that the royal family, the institution he was born into, the one he served, the one that shaped every aspect of his public life, is fundamentally broken, toxic, racist, indifferent to the well-being of its members. He has made this argument in a memoir, in a documentary series, in public interviews, and in a series of legal actions against British media organisations. He has sacrificed friendships, family relationships, and the last traces of the public goodwill that once made him one of the most popular members of the royal family in doing so. And throughout all of it, he has positioned himself as Meghan's protector, the man who would not allow his wife to suffer as his mother had suffered, the prince who chose love and truth over institution and duty. That is the story he has told, consistently, repeatedly, with evident emotional conviction. But here is the question that Candace Owens and others are now raising. What happens to that story? What happens to Harry's role in it if the person he has been protecting and championing has not been entirely straightforward with him? What happens if the narrative he has sacrificed so much to defend is built, even in part, on a foundation that is less solid than he believes? This is not a small question. Harry has staked everything, his relationship with his father, his brother, his country, his institution, on the belief that Meghan's account of herself and her experiences is accurate and complete. If any part of that account is subsequently found to be less than accurate, the implications for Harry personally are profound, not just reputationally, personally, because he has made choices, irreversible choices, based on a narrative he has accepted without question, and the possibility that he may not have had the complete picture is something that even sympathetic observers are beginning to quietly acknowledge. There is something both poignant and troubling about that possibility. A man who has clearly been through genuine pain and who clearly believes he is acting in accordance with his deepest convictions, but who may have been operating, at least in part, with incomplete information. Whether that is the case remains unproven, but the question is now being asked loudly enough that it cannot be ignored.
So I have to ask, is this woman crazy? Is she that much of a liar, or is there something deeper? Because just to give you another example, she claims that she was 13 years of age when she started to work for Humphrey Yogurt, in spite of the fact that Humphrey Yogurt has said that they have never employed anybody at age 13. Number two, she claims that when she started working at Humphrey Yogurt, she ran into Yasmin Bleeth, and that she congratulated Yasmin Bleeth for her deodorant commercial. Yasmin Bleeth didn't do that deodorant commercial until 1997.
So she's saying, you need proof that I'm authentic? I just dropped myself twerking. Obviously, I'm authentic. So she's bringing that up to say there is now PR. I have proven that I am authentic because I twerked with my husband in a room. That's not a normal way to answer the question. If somebody asked me about my authenticity, I would say I don't need to justify that I authentically am who I am.
If we step back from the specific details for a moment and look at the broader strategic picture, something very interesting begins to emerge. Because this is not simply a story about a number, or a magazine, or a database entry. It is a story about how public personas are constructed, and about the extraordinary lengths to which people in the public eye will sometimes go to ensure that the persona they present to the world is the one that lands the way they need it to land. Candace Owens makes this argument with some force. She points to the fact that Meghan Markle did not arrive on the public stage by accident. She was, by all accounts, a deeply intentional self-promoter, long before she became a duchess. The lifestyle blog she ran, The Tig, was not merely a creative outlet, it was a carefully curated window into a very specific vision of who Meghan Markle was and what she stood for. The associations she cultivated, the causes she aligned herself with, the way she positioned her biracial identity as a source of both challenge and strength, all of it was constructed with evident deliberateness. That is not, in itself, a criticism. Every public figure constructs a persona to some degree. The question is where construction ends and deception begins. And Owens is arguing that in Meghan's case, the line between the two is considerably blurrier than has ever been acknowledged. Think about what it would mean, in practical terms, to adjust a documented birth year in the context of an acting career. Hollywood's obsession with youth is well documented and deeply structural. Actresses are routinely sorted into categories based on age ingenue, leading lady, character actor, and the boundaries of those categories are enforced with a ruthlessness that most industries would not tolerate. In that environment, appearing younger than you are is not merely a vanity. It can be a survival strategy. It can be the difference between being considered for a certain category of roles and being quietly passed over. If Meghan's career was built in the context of that pressure, and all available evidence suggests it was then, the incentive to manage the biographical detail of her age would have been real, immediate, and ongoing. Not a single dramatic decision, but a series of small, incremental choices, each one seemingly minor, collectively forming something much more significant. The database listing that reflects a slightly different year, the magazine feature that carries a different number, the gradual solidification of a revised timeline into accepted fact, and then the marriage to Prince Harry, the global stage, the book deals, the Netflix deal, the Spotify deal, all of them predicated, to some degree, on the specific story of who Meghan Markle is, her background, her journey, her authentic self. A story that Owens is now suggesting may have been more constructed than it appeared.
Are you telling me that that commercial, which was so pivotal for Meghan Markle, she didn't even bother to watch so she can recount the story and say when I was 12 rather than when I was 11? Because the commercial is out in the public domain, and I will leave the link for you guys to go watch it. It was done when she was 12 years of age. So there is something that is not connected.
Silence everybody and just produce a DNA sample or proof of delivery.
It's like she's playing a human being, like it's a performance.
Let us be specific about the claims that are being examined, because specificity is what separates this conversation from generic gossip. Candace Owens and the critics who have amplified her work are not making vague gestures toward inconsistency. They are pointing to concrete, named, documented pieces of evidence and asking concrete, named, answerable questions about them. The 17 magazine listing of 1,997 is the most frequently cited, a feature in a national publication, listing Meghan as 21 in a year, when, if her documented birth year is accurate, she would have been 15 or 16. Owens's question is simple. How does that error get made? Magazine features in the 90s were not random. They were based on submitted information, press materials, and biographical profiles. An age does not appear in print without some source for it. So where did the number 21 come from? The earlier IMDb listing, citing 1,977 as a birth year, is the second named piece. IMDb, for all its imperfections, draws its data from somewhere. Listings do not generate themselves. And while it is true that the platform is editable and has historically contained errors, the specific nature of this error listing a birth year 4 years earlier than the current official record is not the kind of mistake that typically happens at random. It suggests a source, and the question of what that source was is one that has not been satisfactorily answered. Then there is the Northwestern University angle. Meghan has spoken frequently and warmly about her time at Northwestern, her double major in theatre and international studies, the experiences that shaped her, the community she was part of. Owens has noted that photographs from that period of Meghan's university life, when examined closely, show her in social groups, where a significant number of the other individuals appear to be substantially older than a standard undergraduate cohort would suggest. Alumni records from those groups, she claims, include people born in the early 1970s, making them, if that is accurate, considerably older than the early 20s student body that a 1981 birth year would place Meghan among. On its own, this proves nothing. Universities are full of mature students, people returning to education after time away, postgraduate students mixing with undergraduates. Social groups do not sort themselves neatly by birth year. All of that is true. But Owens is making a cumulative argument, and this element adds to the cumulation in a way that is difficult to simply dismiss. And then there is the matter of what people who were actually present have said. Owens has referenced accounts from individuals who claim to have known Meghan during her Northwestern years, accounts that describe a sense at the time that she was older than the age she was representing herself as. These accounts are, of course, unverified. They cannot be independently confirmed, but they are consistent with the broader picture that Owens is building, and they add a very human dimension to what might otherwise seem like an abstract debate about records and databases.
Growing speculation that Meghan Markle went under the knife before her Paris disaster trip designed to traumatize Prince Harry, with that journey through Paris emulating that.
It's a boundary you want to push is your face. Go for it. Go for it. If that's the boundary you want to push, if you want to see how far you can stretch your face before it pops, go for it.
There is a dimension to this story that rarely gets the attention it deserves, and it is, in many ways, the most consequential dimension of all. Because this is no longer simply a story about two individuals and their choices. It is a story that directly implicates two children who had no say in any of it, and whose futures will be shaped by decisions made before they were old enough to understand what was happening. Archie Harrison is 6 years old now. Lilibet Diana is 3. They are growing up in Montecito, California, in a household where their parents' very identity, their purpose, their grievances, their public meaning is inseparable from a narrative about authenticity and honesty. They are being raised in the shadow of a story their parents have told the world, that they left an institution because they valued truth over comfort and people over protocol. That is a powerful legacy to grow into. But what happens to that legacy if the foundation of the narrative is found to be less stable than it appears? What happens when Archie and Lilibet are old enough to search their own names online, old enough to find the questions that have been raised, the claims that have been made, the inconsistencies that have been documented? What do they make of a story that was told with such conviction, but that the world has spent years picking apart? Candace Owens has raised this dimension explicitly. She has argued that the long-term reputational consequences of this story are not just about Harry and Meghan. They are about the children who will inherit whatever public identity their parents have built, and who will have to navigate a world in which that identity is contested, questioned, and in some quarters, actively disbelieved. There is also the question of institutional legacy. The royal family, the institution that Harry and Meghan left, and against which they have made some of their most serious public accusations, has an interest in this story that goes beyond mere institutional defensiveness. If the narrative that justified the departure from royal life is found to be built on shaky foundations, then the accusations made against the palace during the process of that departure, accusations of racism, of institutional cruelty, of deliberate neglect, also need to be re-examined. The institution has said very little publicly, in keeping with its long-established tradition of dignified restraint, but in private, the questions being raised are not going unnoticed. And then there are the business relationships, the Netflix deal, the Spotify deal, which has already ended, the speaking engagements, the advocacy work, the brand associations, all of them predicated on a very specific version of who Meghan Markle is. If any element of that identity is seriously challenged, not just questioned in the corners of the internet, but challenged in a way that breaks into mainstream consciousness, the commercial implications are significant. Companies that have built partnerships around the Meghan Markle brand have done so on the basis of that brand's value. And the value of a brand built on authenticity depends entirely and absolutely on the authenticity of the person at the center of it.
A week after she drops this, she goes on a podcast. She gets a lot of hate. People don't think you're authentic. Like, what do you have to say to people who don't think you're authentic? And here's what Meghan Markle says.
You have to be authentic. Just be authentic. Did you see my baby mama dance? I mean, stop it. First of all, can I just tell you the timing of that? We maybe watched it like 20 times yesterday. And I was like,
okay, let's come out of there.
The metadata of the picture says that it was taken on May 8th, 2019. And he was born on May 6th, 2019. Can somebody please explain that to us?
The royal family as an institution has always operated according to a set of unspoken but deeply understood rules. Chief among them, never dignify an attack with a direct response, never engage with gossip, never descend to the level of those who seek to drag the institution into public controversy. The dignity of silence has been the palace's default position through decades of tabloid excess, and it has served the institution well, mostly. In the current climate, that silence reads differently than it once did. When William and Catherine stepped back from royal duties during the Wales family health crisis of recent years, Catherine's cancer treatment, the quiet reshuffling of royal responsibilities, they did so with a composure that the British public responded to with something close to reverence. Here were people carrying genuine private burdens with dignity and grace. No documentaries, no tearful interviews, no book deals processing the experience for public consumption. Just quiet, steady service. The contrast with the Sussex approach could not be more stark, and it is a contrast that has not been lost on the British public, nor on the international audience that has followed this story. William and Catherine have, by simply continuing to do their jobs with quiet professionalism, positioned themselves as the antithesis of everything the Sussex narrative represents. They have not had to say a word about the questions now being raised. Their behaviour has said it for them. Within the palace, those with knowledge of the institution's private thinking have suggested that there is no great appetite to engage with the specifics of the Candace Owens story. The palace does not comment on what it regards as celebrity gossip, and it has consistently declined to be drawn into the ongoing Sussex media drama in any way that would give that drama further oxygen. But sources familiar with the institution's mood have indicated that the questions now being asked are being noted, and that the sense within palace walls is that the truth, whatever it is, has a way of eventually making itself known without any institutional assistance. King Charles, now in the later chapter of a reign that began under deeply complicated circumstances, has maintained his characteristic quiet on matters Sussex. The relationship between the king and his younger son remains one of the great unresolved questions of the current royal era, something that those close to the king describe as a source of genuine personal pain, navigated with the stoic emotional restraint that has defined Charles throughout his public life. Whether the questions now being raised about Meghan's background change anything in that relationship remains to be seen. But they cannot be making an already complicated situation any simpler.
He owes it to the public of each and every country of which the king is monarch to clear up any doubts about anybody in the line of succession. Meghan's conduct is what has triggered all of this. Oh, Archie doing a deep dive between the knees. Archie competing with Tom Daley before he was even given birth to. Archie's unique qualities, and we need to remember that Archie was truly unique because his first word was crocodile. And Archie, of course, was the product of a union that maritally started when they were roasting chicken. And I leave it at that. But what I will go back to say, in terms without giving too much levity to their Harry and Meghan's really crazed behavior.
Strip away all the specific claims for a moment. Set aside the magazine listing, the database entry, the metadata timestamp, the alumni photographs. Set all of that to one side and ask a more fundamental question. What does this story reveal about character? Not about a number, not about a year, not about the technical question of what official records say. About the kind of person who, if these claims are accurate, would make the choices being described. Candace Owens has been remarkably direct on this point. She argues that the habit of shaping one's biographical details for maximum effect, of treating the basic facts of one's own life as raw material for a more compelling narrative, does not stay contained to any single area. It bleeds. If someone is willing to be flexible about something as fundamental as their birth year, the argument goes, what else are they willing to be flexible about? Where does the willingness to shape the story end? And where does simple, honest, self-reporting begin? This is the character argument, and it is the argument that resonates most deeply with the audience that is following this story. Because this audience, overwhelmingly women, predominantly older, largely British and American, did not fall out of love with Harry and Meghan over a newspaper headline. They fell out of love over time, through a series of moments where something did not quite ring true, a claim that seemed slightly too convenient, an emotion that seemed slightly too perfectly timed, a detail that, when you checked it, turned out to be slightly different from how it had been presented. Each of those moments was, individually, dismissible. Together, they built something. A sense of unease. A growing conviction that what was being offered as unvarnished personal truth was, in fact, a performance. And Candace Owens is now articulating, in her characteristic unsparing way, the endpoint of that growing conviction, that if you cannot trust the basic biographical facts, you cannot trust anything that is built on top of them. That is a damning conclusion. It is also, for a significant and growing portion of the public, an entirely credible one. Not because people delight in believing the worst about Meghan Markle, though some undoubtedly do, but because trust, once eroded, is extraordinarily difficult to rebuild. And the trust between Meghan Markle and a meaningful section of the public has been eroding, steadily and publicly, for years. This story is not the cause of that erosion. It is the latest visible symptom of it.
Can't ignore them if they keep popping up doing stuff like this. That's the thing. We're kind of in a mutually abusive, toxic relationship, aren't we? The media and Harry and Meghan, because they keep doing stuff wanting attention. Then they get quite adverse reaction most of the time. Then they react really badly to the reaction. And so it goes on.
Well, what it really boils down to is the threat they offer. If the threat was punctured, which I hope my book will do.
August 4th, 40 years ago, Meghan was born, and she was born as a C-section, so she was put in my arms.
No examination of this story would be complete without considering the people who ought to know the truth of it better than anyone, the members of Meghan's own family. And here, the picture becomes, if anything, more complicated rather than less. Thomas Markle Sr., Meghan's father, is now in his 81st year. He has spent the period since Meghan's marriage to Prince Harry in a state of almost continuous public exposure, giving interviews, sharing private communications, appearing on British television with a regularity that has made him, despite everything, one of the most recognisable peripheral figures in the entire Sussex story. He has spoken about Meghan's childhood, her ambitions, her drive, her relationship with him, and its painful deterioration. He has, in short, been anything but reticent. But Candace Owens has noted something interesting about Thomas Markle's behaviour when the question of Meghan's birth year comes up specifically. Rather than the direct, detailed answers that have characterised so much of his public commentary on other topics, the birth year question has elicited a notably different response. Reports connected to this line of inquiry suggest that when Thomas Markle has been pressed on this specific detail, the precise year, the documented date, the answer has been less than straightforward, less than immediate, a redirection to official records, rather than the confident paternal certainty that one might expect. Owens points to this not as definitive proof of anything, but as consistent with a pattern. When a father cannot answer a simple question about when his daughter was born with the kind of immediate, specific certainty that any parent would have that is worth noting, it does not prove the claims being made, but it does not do anything to disprove them either. And in a story built on cumulative inconsistency, the absence of a clear, confident rebuttal from the one person who ought to be most capable of providing it is itself a form of information. Then there is Samantha Markle, Meghan's half-sister. Samantha, who is now in her early 60s, has been one of the most vocal and persistent critics of Meghan's public narrative, and her commentary has ranged from the credibly pointed to the frankly excessive. She is not an unbiased source. She has a book. She has grievances. She has a personal stake in challenging Meghan's version of events. All of that needs to be acknowledged. But even accounting for all of that, there is one detail from Samantha's account that keeps surfacing in this conversation, and it is genuinely difficult to explain away. Samantha has said, in various public contexts, that growing up with Meghan did not feel like growing up with someone who was 17 years younger, that the age gap between them did not register the way that a 17-year gap between siblings typically registers, that Meghan felt closer in age not by 1 or 2 years, but by something more significant. Now, Samantha Markle is not a disinterested observer, and her memory of childhood dynamics may be coloured by the subsequent bitterness of the adult relationship. That caveat is real and important. But for those who are already examining the biographical timeline for inconsistencies, her account adds a detail that fits the pattern in a way that is uncomfortable to dismiss.
Meghan Markle. Has she gone under the knife? Let's start by looking at her from the age of 17 to today at the age of 38. Are you seeing any obvious changes here? Well, I'd like to have you focus on her nose and her lips. Those are two areas that we're really going to focus on.
So it's kind of like, it's an obsession with this woman. The same thing for the marriage. Remember when she said that she didn't know anything about the royals, and yet she did an interview way back when she was criticizing Catherine's wedding, saying, oh, that was a big thing, that she didn't need that woman didn't need that spectacle, and blah, blah, blah.
All of this is happening against the backdrop of a Sussex royal family relationship that has reached what can only be described as a state of frozen stalemate. There are no formal channels of communication. There is no roadmap to reconciliation that either side has publicly acknowledged. The rapprochement that many people hoped might follow the King's cancer diagnosis, a shared crisis creating a shared humanity, has not materialised in any visible way. Harry returned briefly to the United Kingdom in circumstances that were widely covered and widely interpreted, but the thaw, if there was one, was brief, and the status quo has returned. That status quo is one in which two of the most senior members of one of the world's most scrutinized families are living in California, funding their lives through a combination of commercial deals and speaking engagements, while the institution they left continues its work without them, and by most measures, without any great difficulty. The monarchy endures, the public interest endures, the relevance of William and Catherine endures, and the Sussex story, which was supposed to represent a bold new chapter, has instead settled into something that looks increasingly like a long, uncomfortable coda. The questions now being raised by Candace Owens do not exist in isolation from this context. They are part of a broader reassessment, one that has been building for years and that has found expression in declining public approval ratings, reduced media interest in the Sussex content output, and a growing sense among even former supporters that the Sussex narrative has run its course. What is striking is the way in which this reassessment has happened without any particular orchestration from the royal family itself. The palace has not needed to campaign against the Sussex narrative. It has simply allowed the Sussex narrative to exist in the world, to be tested, examined, and judged against the evidence, and the judgment, for a significant and growing portion of the public, has not been flattering. Not because the palace has won some kind of PR battle, but because, over time, the details that do not add up have become too numerous to ignore. Candace Owens' investigation into the age question is the latest, and, in some ways, the sharpest expression of that broader phenomenon. She is not the first person to question Meghan's narrative. She will almost certainly not be the last, but she is doing it at a moment when the audience for those questions is larger, more attentive, and more primed to take them seriously than at any previous point. And that timing matters enormously.
If you go back and you look throughout Meghan Markle's entire career, she never wanted people to know that she was black. She never wore that on her sleeve. She never spoke about her blackness.
Stupidly put out so many dumb lies, the car chase, etc., that now nobody believes anything they say. And that's scary and dangerous because it sometimes puts us off in directions that we need to be better about. But man, the more and more I look at and research this stuff, I'm not obsessed with these two. I'm looking at them with a very clear eye.
Step back far enough from any story, and what you see is never really about the specific details. The specific details are the vehicle. The real question is always larger, always more fundamental. And in this case, the real question is one that goes to the heart of how we understand public life in the modern world. We live in an era in which personal narrative has become the primary currency of public identity. It is no longer enough to be talented, or accomplished, or even powerful. You have to have a story of struggle and resilience, of injustice overcome, of authentic self-discovery in the face of institutional resistance. That story is what makes you legible to a mass audience. It is what gives your opinions weight, your advocacy credibility, your commercial ventures the warm glow of purpose. Meghan Markle has been one of the most successful practitioners of this art. Her story, the biracial girl who did not fit, who worked hard, who fell in love with a prince, and then discovered that the fairy tale came with impossible conditions, is one of the most compelling personal narratives of the last decade. It has generated billions in media coverage, tens of millions in commercial deals, and a level of global cultural attention that very few individuals outside the highest tier of political leadership have ever achieved. But here is the thing about stories built on personal authenticity. They are only as strong as the authenticity at their foundation. The moment a significant detail in the story is found to be questionable, the entire structure becomes vulnerable. Because if the story was shaped, if even the most basic biographical facts were managed and adjusted, then the authenticity on which everything else rests was never quite what it appeared to be. And the audience that invested emotionally in that story, that allowed it to move them, that allowed it to shape their understanding of race and privilege and institutional power, deserves to know whether they were responding to something real. Candace Owens is asking that question loudly and unapologetically. She is not doing it gently. She is not doing it with the careful qualifications of academic inquiry or the hedged language of responsible journalism. She is doing it the way she does everything directly, combatively, with an absolute conviction that the question matters, and that the refusal to answer it is itself an answer. Whether the specific claims she is making are ultimately validated or not, the conversation she is driving is one that a significant portion of the public clearly wants to have. The questions about Meghan Markle's biographical consistency have been circulating for years in the quieter corners of the internet, dismissed, ignored, or actively suppressed. Owens has pulled them into the mainstream with a force that makes them impossible to ignore. And once questions like these are in the mainstream, once they have been asked loudly enough by someone with a big enough platform, they do not go quietly back into the shadows. They stay, they wait, and they keep getting asked until someone provides an answer that actually satisfies. That is where this story stands right now. Not closed, not resolved, not tidied away into a definitive conclusion. Open, active, growing, and watched with extraordinary intensity by an audience that has invested years of emotional energy into this saga, and that is no longer willing to simply accept what it is told without asking the harder questions underneath. The age question, as Candace Owens has framed it, is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of a reckoning about image and identity, about authenticity and performance, about the extraordinary human capacity to shape a story, and about what happens when the story we have been given turns out to be something other than the whole truth. We are in the middle of that reckoning now, and we are nowhere near the end.
This crisis won't die down until the irrefutable truth comes out.
Samantha Markle has never told me a lie. Every single thing that she has said about either you or Meghan has checked out factually. And she is now suing Meghan. You're prepared to testify for Samantha against Meghan?
And that is where I want to leave you tonight with a question that I suspect has been sitting quietly at the back of your mind throughout this whole story. Because I think most of you watching this have spent years extending Meghan Markle the benefit of the doubt. You watched her arrive on the royal scene. You perhaps wanted to believe in the story she was telling. You gave her the space that any newcomer deserves. And then, one detail at a time, something shifted. So I want to ask you directly, when you hear these questions about the most basic biographical facts, about documents and timelines and records that simply do not line up the way they should, does any part of you think, this explains something? Does any part of you feel that this is the missing piece, the detail that makes the rest of the inconsistencies suddenly make sense? And here is my second question, and this one is for those of you who have been following this story from the very beginning. At what point does a pattern of inconsistency stop being a collection of innocent errors and start being something that deserves a direct, honest, verifiable answer? We have been told, time and again, to simply trust the narrative. But trust is earned through consistency, and consistency, in this case, is precisely what seems to be in short supply. Thank you so much for spending this time with me today. I genuinely mean that. The fact that you stay, that you think, that you engage with these stories so thoughtfully rather than just accepting the headlines at face value that means everything. You are exactly the kind of audience that makes this worth doing. If today's video gave you something to think about, or something to talk about with a friend, please do give it a like. It helps more people find this channel and join the conversation. And if you are not subscribed yet, do hit that button now so you do not miss anything as this story continues to unfold. Share it too, if you feel so inclined, because these are conversations that deserve to be had in the open, not just in the quiet corners of the internet. Until next time, take care of yourselves.